Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. Now, this is the final Friday before Halloween, so sadly, this means our Halloween horror movie celebration month has come to an end. The films that I'm recommending today are all films that were entirely new to me this season. I'd never heard about them before, I'd never seen them before, but they didn't fit in any of the other categories that we celebrated earlier, and I didn't want to let these fall by the wayside. So this week is a little bit of a hodgepodge. There's no underlying theme other than that these three movies are excellent horror films. They're from very, very different subgenres of scary movies, and thematically definitely don't really touch on anything the same. So like I said, hodgepodge, grab bag, whatever you want to call it. But they are three excellent horror films that I really, really strongly recommend that you check out. As always, these films are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. And I guess without any further ado, let's jump into this last week of horror movies. Okay, starting things off with a recommendation on Hoopla, that is 2021's Censor. Now, Censor is one of the UK's latest additions to some seriously solid psychological horror films. For whatever reason, they're really delving into that subgenre and they are doing an excellent, excellent job. And Censor is one of the ones that has, in recent years, really, really grabbed my attention. So in this film, we are following a film censor named Enid. She's known within that particular community as being very straight-laced. She's really strict about what she allows through. She kind of has almost a bit of a personal vendetta against violence on film. And she ends up coming into contact with this horror film that stars a woman who eerily reminds her of the sister she lost when she was quite young. And the whole film becomes this psychological tsunami of her searching for this woman and where she is and how, all of these little pieces fit together. So you definitely got horror elements in there, but there's also this intense mystery that you're trying to unravel too. And while you're unraveling it, she herself is unraveling. And it was just one of those movies that really pulled me in pretty much from the first few scenes. Enid is played by a woman named, and I'm going to butcher this name. I am absolutely terrible with Irish pronunciation. I believe her name is Naim Alkar. I could be about 1,000 times wrong on that, but I believe her name is Naim Algar, and she is amazing in this. She carries the role really physically, like she is tense. Her body is very tense throughout all of these scenes, and you can see that tension just growing just as the tension in the film does as well, which if you follow filmmaking at all, like you're not filming in sequence. So like that sort of buildup of physical tension is incredibly challenging to put within a role, but she does an incredible job of it. And that just adds this other layer of intensity to the character she's playing. There's some seriously creepy side characters in here that it just makes your skin crawl to see them on screen and to hear the things that they say. And again, the whole concept, stories that are kind of believable at the same time. So when she was a young girl, she and her sister managed to get separated, and so they never find out what happens to the sister. She's just lost in the ether. And in the context of this film, her sister is most recently declared dead. So, of course, Enid is dealing with this new sense of grief that's actually connected to an incredibly old sense of grief. And you see how this psychological spiral is just sort of forming this awful miasma around her. And you add on to that these layers of just sort of skin crawling creepiness from the fact that she's now sort of falling into a world of British horror film that feels almost like snuff film. It's not, but it definitely has that vibe. It feels very naturalistic and real. So she's falling into that realm, and you've got all of these elements working together. And the atmosphere at that point just becomes kind of like stifling. It's hard to watch in some places because not because it's like overwhelmingly scary. It's not like there are jump scares all over the place. It's not like, it's certainly not Saw or any of these like torturous like horror gore films or anything, but that psychological element really really feels oppressive, and it was really interesting to watch. So if you're looking for something that is kind of psychologically heavy in addition to scary and intense and just a little bit off the beaten path from what you usually find in this kind of horror film, make sure you check out Censor on Hoopla. Again, Naim Algar could be totally different from that, but she plays this character perfectly, really, really spot on presentation. And I just think, even for her performance alone, totally worth the watch. Again, available on Hoopla, Censor, you won't regret it. Okay, moving right along to our second recommendation. This one is also available on Hoopla, and it is 2022's Piggy. This is my pick of the week, folks. This might be my pick of the entire month. I'm so happy I found this because it is an incredibly good horror film. It's an incredibly well done film in general, but really for the genre, it is, I think, quite phenomenal. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned on multiple occasions that I am not a fan of the slasher horror subgenre. I really just generally am not into that. It's just not my genre. This is kind of the exception to the rule. It's not supernatural in any way, shape, or form. It's not based on folklore. There's certainly no sentient plants. But it's just horrible things that human beings do to each other, but it is ridiculously well done and phenomenal performance by the main actress. So in Piggy, we are following Sarah. Uh, she is this really isolated young girl. She is constantly being bullied by the other teens who surround her. She is sort of not understood by her family, her parents, her brother. They all sort of help to push her to the margins. She's one of the most alone people you could possibly imagine. And she's just a tragic figure pretty much from the very beginning of this film. And on one sort of fateful day, she wanders off to sort of go take a dip in this isolated pond because it's a hot day and she just wants to cool off and like relax. And she runs into a mysterious stranger and additionally ends up running into a handful of these tormentors from school, these like stereotypical mean girls. They're absolutely horrible to her. They verbally abuse her, they steal her clothes. I mean, they're just the worst kind of mean girls. And then she's already making this lonely trek home, essentially just in her like swimwear. And as the title might suggest, she is quite a bit overweight, and so it's all the more devastating to her to have to sort of make this shameful walk back to town, half naked, when she discovers a van holding her tormentors in the back. They've been kidnapped, and the van drives off, and she is left with this "what do I do" kind of question sort of surrounding her. And that's like the sort of opening salvo of this whole film, what to do. She's in this position where she holds power for the first time, and does she decide to help and like help rescue these women by going to the police, by being questioned and being a proper appropriate citizen, or does she make her own path with what she's going to do? And there are so many incredibly tense, ridiculously scary moments in this. It's it's just a different kind of slasher film, and it really makes you think at the same time that you're watching this girl go through the things that she goes through. And there really is so much growth to Seta. She's this kind of character that you aren't necessarily drawn to, because again, you're made to see her in this marginalized outsider viewpoint. But you also, it's not like you're siding with the mean girls, it's not like you're siding with the kidnappers. You're there's only Sarah to sort of experience this film with, and so you go through all of the emotions she's going through. You want her to make good decisions, but while you're in the film, like, you what is the good decision here? As far, and I'm not talking about your base, obviously, like good bad choices, but like other choices she's forced to make as the film continues. It just really got to me, and I haven't felt that way specifically about a slasher film, I don't think, ever. I really do think this was a very different example of the subgenre for me from any others that I've watched in the past. And I don't know, there's just something about that main character that really, really struck me as one of a kind. It just was not something I was expecting to find. So the director and creator of this film is Carlota Pereira. She is actually basing this off of a short film she made in 2018. I believe you can actually watch it online legally for free. And it won a ton of short film awards at the time. And she decided she really wanted to expand. And what's super interesting is, even though that film was pretty much 5 years ago almost, when she filmed it as to this today, the same girl plays that teenager and is completely believable as a teenager. I think that's crazy, because like a half a decade, and she really does, there's no doubt when you're watching it she could totally be a teen. And I did go back and watch the short film after this one, because I'd never heard about this anywhere. And even within that super short film format, with very little dialogue, the girl who plays Sarah does an amazing job. She really is just a phenomenal actress. I 100% am going to be following her career, because she's just a great, great performer. So yeah, this is sort of an expansion of that story. 100% don't watch the short film before you watch this one, just because it does have spoilers. So I want you to be able to like go into this one clean. And there's just something about this particular film that really, really grabbed me. And, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to look for more slasher films, but I 100% am at least going to follow this director and this actress should they do other work, specific, like especially together, but within this genre. I 100% would do that. If you're looking for something that has increasing amounts of tension, because this one does, like, you are really, really there with Sarah. Like, every time something scary happens, every time you have like a tension filled moment in a scene, it's really very, very well done atmospherically. This is a Spanish language film, so there are subtitles. I waited to mention that just because I hoped that people would be grabbed by the enthusiasm for this movie. So yes, it does have subtitles, but as I always say when I talk about foreign language films, this is totally, totally worth it. I know a lot of people are not big fans of subs, but this one, it's so good. So again, this is my pick of the week. Excuse me. Possibly my pick of the month. Piggy. It's available on Hoopla. I cannot recommend this one enough. So good. It's a must watch. Okay, so my final pick of this week is also available on Hoopla, and that is 2019's Ro. So this one is one of those scary movies that is absolutely in my wheelhouse. It is a supernatural horror film that is based on Southeast Asian folklore, and I adore horror films that are based on folklore. There's just something about, legend, myth, folk tales that has just always fascinated me. It's usually a story that's been told thousands and thousands of times over generations to explain a thing that cannot be explained outside of this sort of mythos that we need to create in order to make any semblance of sense around this happening. And I think the kind of scariness of that translates to any language, to any setting. You know, as people, we have to figure out something that explains it. So even if it's supernatural, at least there's some sort of why. And I think there's an inherent scariness about that, like things that can only be explained by that otherness. And Ro is absolutely like steeped in that sort of supernatural scariness. So this is a Malaysian film. So it is Malay language. It does have English subtitles. I know I just talked about a subtitled film. This one as well is 100% worth dealing with the subs. It is really, really creepy. And I will say visually, it is pretty terrifying in some spots. Like really just horrifying in some spots. So it is one of those period pieces that doesn't give us really like any sort of specificity whatsoever. It could be like 1800s, it could be like late 1700s, I don't know. It just, we just know that it's not in contemporary times, right? And we're following this family that lives out in a miscellaneous forest. Just one random day, they are walking home and they run across this girl, just this random little girl in the middle of the forest, and they decide to take her home like you do. I will say, if you ever are in a forest with a random really, really creepy child, I don't know if it were me that I'd be like, I shall take her home, she shall be my squishy, and she shall be my, like that's not, this is again, in folktales this happens a lot, like the abandoned child. But I mean, in all of the folk tales we hear about, like, this is always a terrible idea. Just like within like all scary movies subgenres, you have rules. Don't break the rules. This family breaks the rules and terrible things happen. Really terrible things. Like, there are a couple scenes where it was just not, is not enjoyable. It was so unsettling as to make you feel almost uncomfortable in parts of it, which I still think make it a really good film. Like, that's the kind of horror that I really do actually like the unsettling factor, where you're really uncomfortable and you just have that sort of like, I don't know, fizzy feeling that where it's like something, there's just something that's not right. And this movie, it pervades this entire movie. You have phenomenally well. So this is one of the recent rash of Southeast Asian films that have a fairly low budget but managed to create a really, really phenomenal finished product. A lot of them are based on folklore, but as far as Southeast Asian cinema, horror cinema goes, that's been happening for decades at this point. There's this new set of critics who are like that talk about, that actually talk about how it's a new thing, and it really, really isn't. If you've ever followed Thai film or Indian horror or Malaysian horrors or Indonesian horror, like, a lot of it is already based on this particular sort of theme, so it's not a new thing at all. But in any case, there has been a rash of releases sort of centered around that kind of plot device. So this one is a phenomenal example of that. It was sent to the Academy Awards as the Malaysian nominee for Best Foreign Film. It did not end up being one of the final choices, but it was their pick for that particular year. I do know at the big Malaysian Film Awards, it won like 6 or 7 big prizes, including Best Picture. It was very well received by both just standard film critics as well as horror aficionados. So if you're looking for something that is definitely going to scare you, this is a really good example, but this is also just a really good example of how small budget can be done incredibly well. Like we see small budget horror films all the time, and there's just something that feels much more effective in the way that they used their money and budgeted for different things, and it just results in a really creeptastic film. So if you're looking for something steeped in the supernatural, if you like that old world legend mythos kind of vibe, if you like ghost stories, especially like creepy children ghost stories, because man, those ones get to me every time. 100%. Make sure you check out Row. It will really freak you out in the best of ways. So again, available on Hoopla, 2019's Row. Definitely a must watch. Okay, so those were my recommendations for this week. That brings Horror Movie Month to a close. I know the non-horror fans are probably thrilled by that, but if you have been following and you do enjoy watching scary movies around this time, I hope you've had as much fun as I have. If you have any recommendations for horror movies that you think other people should be checking out, whether or not they are available on our digital forms or if you have to do physical media, please jot those down in the comments. This last couple of days will definitely be watching as many scary movies as I possibly can. If you have any recommendations for themes you'd like to see us cover, comment with those as well. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I have had a blast these last few weeks, but I always enjoy putting these lists together. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, close out the episode, say bye, and hopefully I will see you next week.